In the 1990s, Celine Dion was untouchable. Stadiums shook with her voice, Titanic's anthem made her immortal, and awards piled higher than anyone could count. But today, fans are stunned. Once radiant, she now battles a rare disease that's stolen her stage. Appearances spark whispers, photos shock the world. How did the queen of power ballads go from unstoppable to this? Celine Dion's story begins in Charlemagne, a small town in Quebec, Canada. She was the youngest of 14 children, born into a working-class family that lived above a bar her parents ran. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was the family's heartbeat. Her parents performed together, her siblings played instruments, and little Celine absorbed it all. By the time she could walk, she was already singing. At just 12 years old, she wrote and recorded a demo song with the help of her mother and brother. That tape found its way into the hands of René Angelil, a music manager who believed so deeply in her voice that he mortgaged his own home to finance her first album. It sounds like legend, but it's true. From the start, her voice didn't just impress, it overwhelmed. Fans described it as something supernatural, too big for her small frame. In the 1980s, she became a sensation in the French-speaking world. Her songs filled Canadian radio, played in shopping malls, and blared from car stereos. Teenagers memorized every word, parents marveled at her maturity, and critics said her voice carried the weight of someone far beyond her years. When she won the Yamaha World Popular Song Festival in Tokyo in 1982, and later the Eurovision Song Contest in 1988, the international stage could no longer ignore her. The transition into English-language music was the true turning point. In 1990, her album Unison introduced her to American audiences. Tracks like Where Does My Heart Beat Now climbed the charts and gave her a foothold in the US market. Listeners who didn't speak French suddenly felt that same chill, that same awe Canadians had felt for nearly a decade. Celine's rise was not just about her voice, but about timing. Pop music in the late 80s and early 90s was shifting. Audiences were ready for big voices, powerful ballads, and theatrical performances. Whitney Houston had paved the way, Mariah Carey was about to explode, and Celine entered the arena with a unique blend of raw emotion and technical mastery. Her voice became the soundtrack to countless weddings, proms, and radio countdowns. People remember slow dancing to her songs at high school dances or hearing her on endless radio repeats during long drives. By the early 90s, she was no longer just a promising newcomer. She was a star on the rise, bridging two worlds, conquering both French and English markets, and leaving no doubt that she was destined for something much bigger. By the mid-1990s, Celine Dion had become unstoppable. Her voice wasn't just celebrated, it defined an era. She didn't simply sing songs, she created anthems that lived in the bloodstream of the culture. When her 1993 album, The Color of My Love, dropped, tracks like The Power of Love and Think Twice stormed international charts. Radio stations played them relentlessly, and listeners called in just to hear her voice again. Couples chose her songs for first dances. Teenagers sang along into hairbrush microphones. People described her voice as something that made them stop what they were doing and just listen. But it was 1996 that sealed her as a global force. Performing The Power of the Dream at the Atlanta Olympic Games, she sang not just to a stadium, but to billions watching worldwide. The world paused to witness that singular, soaring voice, and for many, it felt like the soundtrack of human triumph. Then came Falling Into You in the same year, an album that sold over 30 million copies. It wasn't just an album, it was a tidal wave. Songs like Because You Love Me became unavoidable, played on radios and shopping malls, on TV soundtracks. The album won 2 Grammys, including Album of the Year, and solidified Celine as one of the most powerful voices on earth. But the true cultural explosion arrived in 1997 with one song tied to one movie, Titanic. My Heart Will Go On wasn't just a hit, it became the emotional heartbeat of a global phenomenon. The film broke box office records, and everywhere you went, from diners to department stores, you could hear Celine's voice. Fans bought the single in the millions. Radio stations practically wore out the track. It became one of the best-selling singles of all time and won her an Academy Award and Grammy. For a generation, that song was more than music, it was memory. First love, heartbreak, and cinematic history rolled into 4 minutes. Her shows reflected that dominance. Celine wasn't just filling venues, she was selling out arenas and stadiums worldwide. Fans camped overnight for tickets. Merchandise sold out before shows even began. She wasn't a star who happened to tour, she was a global event. People wore her style, imitated her stage outfits, and belted her songs at karaoke bars across continents. Even critics who had once dismissed her as too dramatic had to admit the power. Her technique, her range, and her ability to turn a song into a story placed her alongside the greats, Whitney Houston, Barbra Streisand, Aretha Franklin. Yet Celine brought her own brand of drama, a blend of sincerity, vulnerability, and raw force that made audiences feel as though she was singing directly to them. The late 90s saw her cement her reign with the album Let's Talk About Love. It featured duets with Barbra Streisand and Luciano Pavarotti pairings that weren't just collaborations, but statements. Celine Dion was no longer merely a pop star. She was a global icon, straddling pop, classical, and cinematic ballads. Her voice the common denominator that made it all work. By the end of the decade, she had sold more than 100 million albums worldwide. She wasn't just part of the music industry, she was the industry. Wherever you turned, magazines, television specials, Grammy night, Celine Dion was there. For fans, it was impossible to imagine music without her. She felt untouchable, a permanent fixture in the cultural firmament. At her peak, Celine Dion didn't just own the charts, she owned time itself. Her music marked weddings, funerals, Olympic ceremonies, blockbuster films, and everyday car rides. She was everywhere and the world embraced her as its voice. After years of breaking records and living at the very center of global attention, the early 2000s brought a shift. Celine Dion's voice was still flawless, but the cultural winds began to change. Pop music was entering a new era. Teen pop idols like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera were dominating charts, while hip-hop and R&B were reshaping radio. The era of the giant power ballad was fading. Celine responded in her own way. Instead of chasing trends, she doubled down on control. In 2003, she signed an unprecedented deal for a Las Vegas residency at Caesar's Palace. At the time, this was seen by many critics as career exile. Las Vegas was considered a place for fading stars, artists clinging to nostalgia rather than shaping the future. The headlines were brutal. Commentators whispered that Celine had surrendered her global throne for a gilded cage in the desert, but the residency was both a triumph and a compromise. The shows were breathtaking, packed with state-of-the-art visuals and her signature voice. Fans from around the world flocked to Nevada just to see her. For millions, it felt like a pilgrimage. Yet for the broader pop world, she was suddenly outside the conversation. Radio wasn't playing her like it once did. MTV wasn't featuring her videos. A new generation grew up without seeing Celine at the top of charts, and the perception began to form. She had quietly stepped aside. Behind the glittering stage lights, darker struggles loomed. Her husband and manager, René Angelil, the man who had believed in her since she was a child, faced repeated battles with cancer. Celine stepped away multiple times to care for him, leaving fans anxious and uncertain. When René passed away in 2016, it wasn't just a personal loss. For Celine, it was losing her anchor, her partner in both life and career. For fans, it marked the end of an era. The cultural shock was real. Longtime admirers, who remembered the unstoppable wave of the 90s, struggled to see their icon retreat from the spotlight. The woman who once dominated stadiums now seemed fragile, human, and vulnerable. Some critics dismissed her as outdated, while others mourned what felt like the fading of one of music's brightest flames. Her story didn't collapse in scandal or disgrace, but in something quieter time, tragedy, and a shifting music landscape. The world hadn't turned against her, but it had moved on. For fans who once heard her daily on every radio, it was like losing a piece of their youth. In the years following her husband René Angelil's death in 2016, Celine Dion's career entered a strange twilight. She was still one of the most recognizable voices in the world, but her presence in pop culture felt distant, almost ghostly. For decades, she had been part of the soundtrack of daily life. Now, she appeared in burst award shows, red carpets, sporadic interviews, but not with the constant force of her earlier years. Her Las Vegas residency, which once seemed like a risky gamble, had by then become a historic triumph. She performed over 1,000 shows across 2 decades, drawing in millions of fans and grossing nearly $700 million. What was once mocked as a career graveyard had turned into a model that other artists, Britney Spears, Lady Gaga, Adele, would later follow. Yet for all its success, the residency also tied Celine to one stage, one city. To see her, you had to travel to her. For casual fans, her global visibility slipped. When she did step out, people noticed changes. Her fashion choices became bolder, often avant-garde, drawing both praise and confusion. Tabloids whispered about her weight loss. Photos sparked endless speculation about her health. Fans who remembered her radiant 90s glow were unsettled, asking, "Is she okay?" Every rare appearance carried more weight, more questions, because the silence in between felt so loud. The media's tone shifted. Instead of celebrating the voice, headlines focused on her body, her absence, her grief. Rumors swirled: was she retiring? Was she too ill to perform? Why was she vanishing from the public eye? Online forums filled with fans trading theories. Some feared the worst. Others hoped she was simply taking time for herself. Celine tried to reassure her audience with a 2019 World Tour announcement: courage. The name itself felt like a message in admission that she was fighting battles unseen. The shows began strong with rave reviews, but then came delays, cancellations, and finally silence again. For fans, the disappointment was deeper than missing concerts. It was the sense that their idol, once everywhere, was slipping away into mystery. The disappearance wasn't total. She gave interviews, appeared at events, even went viral for her high-fashion looks at Paris Couture Week. But compared to the saturation of the 90s, these moments felt like fleeting shadows. People asked not just where her career was going, but where Celine Dion herself had gone. By the early 2020s, the whispers became unavoidable. Stories circulated about an undisclosed illness. Canceled tours piled up. Then, in Boy 2, the truth emerged. Celine revealed she was battling stiff person syndrome, a rare and debilitating neurological disorder. For fans, the revelation was heartbreaking. The woman whose voice once seemed invincible was facing a disease that threatened her very ability to sing. The disappearance at last had an explanation, but it was one that no one wanted to hear. Today, the image of Celine Dion is almost unrecognizable from the one burned into collective memory. Fans remember the powerful ballads, the Titanic anthem that defined a generation, the stadiums shaking under her voice. But now, the conversation is not about chart-topping singles or sold-out tours. It's about survival. In late I2, Celine revealed what many had feared. She suffers from stiff person syndrome, a rare autoimmune neurological disorder. The disease causes severe muscle spasms, stiffness, and mobility issues. Most devastatingly, it affects her vocal cords. For the woman whose voice once felt eternal, it is a cruel irony. She explained in an emotional video that singing the thing she loved most had become a battle against her own body. The contrast is striking. Clips from the 1990s show her commanding stadiums with boundless energy. Recent appearances show her thinner, frailer, her movements measured. Paparazzi photos spark waves of online discussion, with fans voicing shock and heartbreak. How can this be the same woman, they ask? For a generation that grew up with her as a symbol of strength, the reality feels surreal. Her career has ground to a halt. The Courage World Tour, meant to reintroduce her to global stages, was canceled entirely in 2023. Every announcement was met with hope, followed by devastation as new health setbacks emerged. For fans holding tickets, the refunds were not just about money. They were about admitting that the era of seeing Celine Dion live may have ended forever. Yet in her silence, Celine still commands attention. Whenever she appears, whether at a hockey game in Montreal or in a rare social media post, the internet erupts. Fans pour out love, calling her brave, a fighter, an inspiration. Even in absence, she matters. The devotion hasn't disappeared, it has shifted. People no longer expect her to top charts. They simply want her to be well. Financially, she remains secure. With over $800 million earned through tours, residencies, and records, she doesn't need to work another day. But money can't restore what she's lost. The voice, the stage, the communion with fans, that was her lifeblood. Without it, Celine Dion is learning how to live in a quieter world. The irony is painful. In her prime, she was untouchable, her voice larger than life. Now she lives privately, guarded, her health dictating her days. For longtime fans, the dissonance is haunting. They remember hearing "My Heart Will Go On" at their high school dances, their weddings, their moments of triumph and heartbreak. To see the woman who gave them those memories, brought low by illness, feels almost like watching time itself betray them. Still, there are flashes of hope. Celine has said she will not give up, that she is working with doctors and doing everything she can to return to the stage. Whether she ever does is uncertain, but in the meantime, her story has become something different. She is no longer just a singer. She is a symbol of fragility, resilience, and the strange cruelty of fate. It's hard for fans to accept that the woman who once ruled the world's biggest stages now fights simply to walk without pain. But it's the truth. The icon who gave everything is now in the fight of her life. Celine Dion's story is a reminder that even legends are human. The woman whose voice once felt indestructible now faces battles most of us had never even heard of. Her life has shifted from center stage to quiet resilience, from global tours to doctor's visits. Yet the impact of her music hasn't faded. If anything, it feels sharper now, more precious, because we know how fragile it is. For many, hearing her songs is like opening a time capsule. "Because You Loved Me" was the soundtrack to first dances. "It's All Coming Back to Me Now" made long car rides unforgettable. "My Heart Will Go On" carried the weight of one of the most famous love stories in cinema history. Wherever you were, her voice marked the moment. That's why today's news feels personal. Fans aren't just watching a celebrity struggle, they're watching a part of their own past weather. The storms of time. Celine's journey reminds us that even icons can be vulnerable, and that vulnerability can be just as inspiring as their triumphs. She gave everything she had to her audience, and in return, they still stand by her, offering prayers, memories, and loyalty. Do you remember where you were the first time you heard "My Heart Will Go On"? Was it on the radio, at the movies, or maybe at a school dance? For many, that song is more than a melody. It's a moment in life, frozen forever. Share your memory in the comments. Tell us how Celine Dion's music touched your life. And let us know which legend's story you want to see uncovered next. Because behind every unforgettable voice, there's always a story waiting to be told. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss our next stories.